feeling it.
What up, what up? We still here. We still here.
Woo.
Doing the CAUSENETIC podcast. What up, CAUSENETIC family?
Hey, welcome to the CAUSENETIC podcast live at 2023 YMCA General Assembly here in Hotlanta.
Hotland. Oh, you added that one in for effect, huh?
No, the ATL is always hot, baby.
Okay.
Always hot.
Okay, powered by the YMCA Metropolitan Dallas, where it is also hot.
Yeah, CAUSENETIC
Absolutely
means being a person
hot.
or thing that gives rise to a phenomenon that is dynamic or energizing.
We are tackling topics, and we're going to show enough tell the truth.
And I'm Keith and Son.
And I'm Rodrigo Ross.
And today what we're doing here, Rod.
Whew.
Okay.
I had to breathe through this thing because the good bruh is joining us on the stage. The good bruh.
The man that's been dropping knowledge on me for years and years.
Yes, sir.
You know, he's given me a couple of things. He said I could use it. You know, the first three times. You know, I have to say his name, but then after that I can own it, and I've been owning it ever since. They be like, "Boy, you so smart." I said, "Yeah, you know."
He not.
On the back, thanks, Mike. Appreciate you, bro. Appreciate you.
That.
So we got our topic today is Black Gives Back.
And indeed it does.
Featuring none other than Michael DeVaul. Michael DeVaul is a national leader for our boys and young men of color, so we're going to dive deep into that. And we're definitely going to be tackling topics and telling the truth on this one right here. So y'all got to hold on to your seats. I would advise you get your phone out, get your tablet out, go to that note section. If you still use pen and paper, I would take all that out because you're going to get some nuggets dropped on you that you can take back to your community and use right away.
Yes, welcome back.
Hey.
To the CAUSENETIC podcast.
How you doing?
Yes,
Yeah.
Mr. DeVaul.
We got to get you to 5,000 subscribers.
Well, let's do 10 because then I want a shoe budget after that.
Let's do it today.
Yes.
That's the charge.
Let's do it.
Spread the news, get them to 10,000.
Yes, let's do it.
So, since you said it, so just go to any platform that you listen to podcasts
Any
on,
platform
and
that you
just
want.
subscribe and listen to us weekly, and then just give us a 5-star review while you're out there.
Thank
you,
you.
Brother Mike.
Can I first say thank you to the audience. Thank you to
Yes, sir.
Keith and Rodrigo.
Yes, thank you.
What an honor it is to be on. I will say to Keith, the first time you're supposed to give credit to the person. The second time you say, somebody said. The third time is yours.
Okay.
It's yours.
You ain't got to wait
That's
for
it.
three, Keith.
Okay.
That's it.
But
That's
you
it.
just so dope like that. I had to go
somebody
3 times.
said. Yeah.
But the thing
I
with
shut
Keith
you down.
is if he say it, they're going to be like, damn, sound like
Yeah,
Michael
no,
DeVaul
no,
said
he'll
that,
be
didn't he?
all right.
Yeah, he
He'll be
can't.
You know,
I don't know.
you keep
You
throwing
did sound
shade.
like you. I'm
keep
sorry.
throwing shade. Okay. Let's go. So, Mike, you have the Boys and Young Men of Color strategy. Well, no, I would say program. What would you say to that?
I would tell you it's not a program.
Yeah.
Well, how come? Because it has a name to it, and you asking people to get some people together.
Yeah, because I would say every wine has enough programs. You don't need another program.
Well,
Does any wine
amen.
not have enough programs?
Please raise your hand if you don't have enough
I
programs.
would say most wines should be getting rid of programs.
Okay.
Oh.
Right? You
Okay.
should find out ways, maybe 10, 20% of your programs, are how effective are they?
Right.
And
You're
so I
going to need
think the question
security
is,
after this.
how do you use your own program to index on a particular target population,
Okay.
boys of color,
Yeah.
to improve the outcomes for those boys?
Okay. So it's
That's
not a
it.
program.
So-
It's called
it's a
targeted
strategy.
universalism.
What does that mean? Like, help folks with that.
Well, so what it means, right, if you take the data in the aggregate, what it would mean is you would then disaggregate the data and figure out what groups are trending and what groups are stable and or going backwards. And what you would do is the group that goes backwards is the group that you would focus on.
Sure.
There would be no difference than if you had 9 business lines. You would probably decide, right, there's 6 that are doing well, there are 3 that are not so well. You would probably put your best people on that tough challenge, and then you would solve that problem with your best people. And what we would tell you is take your programs and take your best people and index on boys.
How come?
But why boys though?
Yeah,
I mean,
why boys?
So
we're talking about inclusion today.
Yeah.
But why boys? And then more specifically than that, why boys of color?
So let me give you 3 data points. Is that
Okay.
good?
Yes,
Just
sir.
sort of drive on data.
Yes, sir.
One is black men and boys, particularly Hispanic boys also, we're 2 times more likely to go into poverty. Period. So if you look at poverty as a cycle, we can get out of poverty. We can be born to low to moderate income. We can go into middle income and upper income. We fall down in less than a generation.
Wow.
So that would be one, as I would say to my more moderate friends, particularly on the right. The kids and the boys will do one of 2 things when they get older. They'll make or take taxes. You want to make it or take it.
Right.
Yeah, I get
Right.
that.
Right?
That's a
I get that.
T-shirt.
Yeah.
Make her take taxes.
So the question would be is if you look, and some of this is anecdotal, but I could probably tell you to the crowd, if you take any one of your programs, we index on 11 to 17. And so if you take any one of your programs in that particular category, and I would say to you right now, in your own mind, think of what does the demographic profile of the people that you are serving? What does it look like? Now, disaggregate on gender, and then disaggregate on race. Now, let me give you an example. Usually when I go into cities, we're in 56 cities, 27 states. This is the question that I ask. If you have an Achievers program, what does the demographic profile look like? And almost invariably they say, what do you mean? I say, well, go to gender. Well, 80% of our program is girls. Okay, tell me more. What do they look like? Oh man, they're mostly black. And I say, that's incredible. Where are the boys? And they go, we weren't looking for that. We didn't know. And then I go to youth and government. And I say, tell me about your youth and government program. What does the profile look like? 75% girls. Okay. Where are the boys? Now, go to race. It's 75% white girls. And so Achievers, in many ways, and youth and government have the same profile, probably even the same socioeconomic profile, but what we're not indexing is on our boys. And so the challenge we have is, as an organization who has done this before, since 1853, the question is, can we go back without losing girls, because it's not a loss, that's the inclusion part. The question is, can we add boys? Does that make sense?
Yes,
Absolutely makes sense.
So it's more of, in your city, why, if I could say this, and those of us, I anchor under the YMCA's of Washington, Metropolitan Washington, D.C., because that's home of the first Black Y. But last year, they had 1,000 carjackings. 1,000. When they disaggregated the profile of that carjacking, 92% of those are boys. 87% of those boys are under the age of 16. Let me disaggregate one more time. 80% of those boys are black boys. When the police do the exit interview on why they did it, why do you think they did it?
Why did they do it?
They didn't have anything else better to do.
No.
So you carjacking.
Because nothing was on that.
If you think about the genesis of the organization, the why, the WHY, we have to go back to why were we created? Why were we started? From George Williams to Sir Thomas Sullivan, 1851, to Anthony Boyne in 1853. It was always because boys were causing the most trouble. We wreak the most havoc. We don't know how to get out of distress into eustress. And we need to help boys understand that process and what that looks like.
So, in doing so, I have to give all credit where credit is due. I am a firm believer in giving people their flowers while they are here. You are masterful at weaving the history. These are the flowers. This is
I will
weird.
take the flowers. Can we get water?
That was weird. Okay. But you are masterful at weaving the history, right? And the origin, and helping us realize that much of the stuff that we are doing, we're thinking is so new and innovative, been there, done that, got the T-shirt. Talk to us about how the history of this work, particularly for boys and young men of color, has already occurred. Like, what we nervous for about creating something new? We need to go back to what has already worked. We just got away from it.
It's the foundation.
Yeah, so the system of oppression is real. As a black man, I know that. And let me go back to the history of my own history. I am 61.
You look good, Michael. That's because, let me tell y'all, we got regular water.
They did tap.
It's just, the faucet, I don't even know.
We try to be good. We try to be good hosts.
He came in.
Some alkaline.
They were trying to pour him water. I'm going to stop you there. Don't put that in my cup.
And then I have a little sand.
That's why the skin, look at the skin right there.
His handlers came.
How that light hit that skin right there.
They opened a gold box and it said, "Flee." And that is the water, and that is why you look like you look at 61.
So let me index on my own story. Born in 1961, it might be my double up birthday, right? I'm born in 1961. I'm 61.
Okay.
I grew up in the Emerson Street YMCA in Evanston, Illinois. It was a black Y. In 1968, that Y integrated, right, as all Ys were integrating.
Yeah.
And so I was one of the first classes to go into what we would call the white Y. Right, I remember my mom in a little Rambler dropping me off and me saying, like, you got the wrong place. And she said, not today, get out. You know. And so I had to go in. And I think what we have to remember is, I remember Roy Bewley and Otis Blackburn. They were my leaders. In my own hometown, black people, particularly black men, could not go to Northwestern University. We're also home of Northwestern, right? Big Ten school. So we had residence for college students on the second floor. So I had an opportunity in my old black Y to also understand what college meant at a very early age.
Yeah.
And so I think it's broadly the reason we go back is because my own story is that way.
Yeah.
I think secondarily I can see the milestones in my own life. But most importantly, if you think about what happened in 1853 when Anthony Bowen was here, and I think it's important to paint a little bit of context on history.
Sure.
So the context would be Anthony Bowen created the Y, the black Y, the first black Y in Washington, D.C., 1853.
Yeah.
Now, let me step back for a second. In 1850, anybody know what happened in 1850? And I believe we're in a time period where we're feeling like 1850 has resurrected itself. Okay? 1850 was when Millard Fillmore was president. He was a member of the Whig Party. He was centered on being what they would consider to be extreme. And the Republican Party that we now know was formed because he was extreme. But what he passed in legislation prior to him leaving was the Fugitive Slave Act. So remember, that was where they could go back and snatch us and take us right back to the plantation, even though we had our papers. So is some of the legislation that we see today going backwards? Maybe. And so the importance of remembering the history is because we have to figure out what it is we did that was right when we were coming out of that period.
Right.
So that period was the Underground Railroad.
Yeah.
In spite of it all, Harriet Tubman is working with white people, by the way, white abolitionists, to create a strategy to get people free. Anthony Bowen was the same way. He was an abolitionist, building the Black YMCA. He had seen it in London, and he wanted to build it. He had seen it in Boston, and he wanted to build it in his own hometown. Why? Because he was solving a problem in his own hometown. Let me go forward for a minute, because I'm here with Dallas folks, so I think you always have to index where they live, right? If you jump for a second to 1888, some of us don't know this name, William Hutton.
Yes.
1888. William Hutton is Norfolk, Virginia. Richard Morris, who was the white general secretary / CEO at the time, brought William Hutton down from Canada to restart, because it was after the Civil War, to restart the Black Y because it was sort of just running on 3 or 4, right? And he re-energized it with William Hutton. William Hutton's second assistant was a guy named Jesse Moreland. So the second in command was Jesse Moreland. Dallas is home of the Jesse Moreland Y. And so Jesse Moreland was the secretary, basically the number 2 man, the COO of building that Black Y system. And if you look at the edge, what you will see is Anthony Bowen, then we had like 2 or 3, and then it kind of like got jump started again. And then by 1946, we had 84 Black Ys. And then you began to see in that time period of also us going to Africa and other places and building global. So I think it's so important to recognize the history, because in spite of it all, we were building with other people.
Yeah.
We can't forget our Native American brothers, because in 1874 it was Thomas Wakeman.
Yeah.
Right, he built 27 Native American Ys on Native American land. And so it wasn't as if we weren't doing it. And so the reason we index on history is because if we're on a continuum of 1 to 10, the starting point is 6, because history is 1 to 5. And so what we have to remember is history, right? We use a term called Sankofa. You have to go back to get to the present, to go to the future. And there's no reason that you wouldn't index on what was happening in the past to get us to the place. Here's one last contextual point. In the early 1900s, the YMCA was building with the historical Black Colleges University. And some of you may remember the concept of the student Ys.
Yes.
So these were really student activity clubs on college campuses. They didn't have pools and all the other things, right? It was a club called a student Y's on campus. There were 57 overall up until 1946. There were 57 of those. 22 of those were on HBCU campuses. Mm-hmm. Now, why was that? You should say, why was that?
Why was that? Oh,
so,
audience participation.
Yeah,
why
audience participation.
That?
So because it's live.
Because I'm sitting here listening like, why was that?
So why was that? What the Y was doing back then, both the white Y, because there were two Ys, right, at the time. What Ys were doing were, it was a talent acquisition strategy. So we would get onto the campus of Howard. We would find 2 or 3 young men, and we would take them to Norfolk, Virginia to start a new Y. Right? They would go with the leader, and then the leader would take 2 or 3 of those young men and build the Y. That makes sense, right? And so there were 22 of those. So when we think of how did we get to 84, we got there because there was a strategy already in place on talent acquisition. So it was a twofer, a 2-for-1.
Yeah.
Right. And it's so important to just say this before I forget because I'm old. In that CTE strategy, there was a career and technical education strategy at HBCUs. And so I don't have to tell you where the HBCUs are formed. There's 101. You mostly see them around the Eastern Seaboard into the South. They're spotty in other places. You have to go through places like Wilmington, Jacksonville, Edmond Waters. You got to go through some of these places, Norfolk, Virginia, Washington, D.C., Howard. There were 6 HBCU presidents who used to work for the Y before they took over the HBCUs. 6. Here are the 2 most formidable. Mordecai Johnson, the longest standing at Howard, worked for the Y 2.5, 3 years before he went and took over Howard. Now here's why that's important. At Howard, Jesse Moreland has a library because he was a Howard alum. How did he get to the Y? Through Howard. Mordecai Johnson was a fan of the Y. And so he got there, and the whole Moreland library is because when Jesse Moreland died, he left his entire library to Howard. Right? Here's the second most formidable, because we're in Atlanta.
I knew that.
The second most formidable is a guy by the name of Benjamin Mays. Benjamin Mays also worked for the Y prior to working for Morehouse. 3 years. Now, they were in the realm, because Tom is here, they were called international secretaries, because back then the colored concept was meant to be international.
Yeah.
So in the old days, the international would have been more of the Lindas, right?
Yeah.
Is the diversity, inclusion, global person. So generally, the Y was seen as a stepping stone to get to higher ground. And the people who built that strategy, the 22 YMCAs with us, so they didn't build it, but they built it with us, is W.E. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. So if you go back into the history, into our archives, we have a national archives, or there's a book called The Light and the Darkness.
Yes.
And if you go back, it quantifies all this, so you can check me on it, right? You can fact check me. But they built that CTE strategy because Booker T. Washington wanted what? Trades. W.E. Du Bois wanted what? College. And so they collaborated, and even though W.E. Du Bois was a little suspect of the Y, because he accused us of benevolent paternalism, that we were basically trying to turn us into white Christians, basically, contextually. And so he challenged us, but he learned to trust us over time. How's that?
So that's a history lesson right there that you all didn't know.
Told y'all to
Yes,
get
sir.
your papers
Yes, sir.
and pens and everything out. And as you're saying that, the familiarity, right, and some of the reasoning and some of the strategies, those very same things that we can optimize today. Because even when you were talking about the 80 some odd black Ys that existed in the 40s, when they began to be stood up all around the country, it was before the Great Depression. And when you look at them relative to their white counterparts, they survived the Depression at a much higher proportion than YMCAs for primarily white communities. And so understanding that colored-wise, or YMCAs that focus on the needs of Black people are absolutely able to be resilient and thrive and help communities is not a new concept. We don't have to recreate a strategy. Like you said, the history is not 1, it's at 6. We just need to look back a little bit and pull from those strategies to see how we move forward, particularly in this boys and young men of color work.
Yeah, so when you're building systems, right, it's almost like we just take the brush, a big brush, we just brush off the rails.
Yeah.
And we put the train back on the track. We might have to clean it up a little bit, get some new people in there, get some different mindsets going. But this is why the young people, it's so important for young people to understand their history.
Yes, absolutely.
While we are in a time period, obviously, if some of you live in the state of Florida, right, we have history. And we have to acknowledge the history. And we can't go back on the history. I met he is not a young man. I'm indexing because I see the folks in Wilmington. And Suzanne asked me this. Suzanne McCormick asked me to do this. A year ago, there was a statue resurrected in the center of Wilmington, a gold statue, because it's their first Black mayor, a guy named James Sills.
Okay.
Right? James Sills had a statue erected. He asked us to come and speak from the podium. And I was trying to figure out with Suzanne, like, why are you asking me to do this? So I actually called the family, right? And I said, I'm not real sure why we're coming, but let me ask you a question, because he grew up in Wilmington. He was born in Raleigh. He grew up in Wilmington. And here's what he told me. He was 91, and here's what he told me. He said, Mr. DeVaul, at the age of 10, my parents got a divorce. My mother wanted me to go to college. My father wanted me to get into the service trades. His father was a waiter. Because back then, right, cable cars, service, waiters, that's what we did, right? We're very respectable jobs. We did that trade we did. He said, so at 10, I stopped going to school. But I played a lot of billiards. For those who don't know what billiards is, that's pool tables. Right, when the Y used to have a lot of pool tables. And he said, Mr. Redmond got me by the collar and told me to go to school. And he got me back in school. Mr. Redmond was the branch exec of the Walnut Street Y. And he said, Mr. Redmond worked on me for 7 years. And then he told me I needed to go to college. My mother told me to go to college, and his uncles and everybody else had helped become a part of his shaping his clay, right?
Yeah.
And here's a man recalling at 91, like it was yesterday. And he had apparently never told his family the story that he told me. And we put it in the archives, by the way. We took his personal account and put it into the archives. But what he said to me was, I never would have gone to Morehouse if it wasn't for my mom and Mr. Redmond.
Wow.
Now Mr. Sills, Mayor Sills, graduated from Morehouse. That's the most important thing. He went back. He taught at Delaware State. Delaware State is an HBCU. And today he can tell you as a testimony. Now, we also have now, we didn't have this before, a fund that his family has established in his honor. His family has created a philanthropy fund for boys and men of color because it's his storyline.
Yeah.
Right? That's the storyline. And if we just hold the stories, and it's not so much that Black only gives back, but our Black history with our white people and our Native American brothers and sisters, right? Back then, Native American was also mostly Mexican.
Yeah.
Because most of the world was Mexico and the U.S. And so I think what we have to, you have those stories are in your communities.
Yeah. Yeah.
You all have them.
Yeah.
And you should resurrect those stories.
Absolutely.
So, Mike, you brought us up to speed in this history space. And we've seen that boys have always been an important role in the Y, and how the Y has been an important role in their life. And now we are bringing this strategy back to life. And you've had some significant movement with that right there. Take us to the place of how do we implement this more? Because, again, it still sounds like another program. But the important part of it is that if we don't, what's going to continue to happen? And I love the make taxes or take taxes, because that's the truth of it. So I was looking at a stat. It said in 2018, Black Americans represented 33% of the Senate's prison population, nearly triple their 12% share of the United States adult population. Hispanics accounted for 23% of inmates, compared with 16% of the adult population. And so this incarceration rate is super high, and largely with males in there. Like, what does America look like if we don't implement this strategy through the YMCA?
Well, think about chronic absenteeism. So all of you know, you probably in your own hometowns, particularly in low to moderate income communities, you have boys not going to school, which is the first thing that leads to problems. Right? That's why you carjack, because you're not doing nothing and you're not going to school and nothing's happening. And so you got to look at a couple of data points. Here's the most compelling data point for the Y on why you should do it, the WH why you should do it. We know from our own internal data, from 2009 to 2019, you served the least amount of youth in a decade. Now, some people would argue our annual reports and the information that we send in is not always great, but it's what we use. So you can't pick and choose what you use.
Right.
We use our own data, and between those time periods in a decade, we served the least amount of youth. If you go back and extract who's missing, it's a 19% rate on boys. It's a 22% rate on boys of color. So we're serving less boys of color between the ages of 11 to 17, right? And you just extract that data. Now, here's the why, the WHY. In our own data, the profile of who works for us. And so I only can right now, it's gender. We're not real clear on those that are not in the wide gender spectrum. So to my folks who are in the spectrum, we don't count that yet, so I can't speak to it. But 68% of our profile today, we serve women. Our full-time staff is 68% women. Let me go back. In our team programs, probably 65 to 80% girls. Where do we get our people to come in and work for the organization? What did I tell you that the HBCUs did? They went in and indexed the experience, and that's where they got the talent acquisition. And so if you're not doing something that is focused on boys, you may not have boys in your system who can then talk to boys. Right? You may not have boys in your system because the system is indexing. And so you can imagine if you go upline and you go to the data and you follow the points, we can move from 68 to 78% women. Maybe that's not bad, but I'm saying if boys are the struggle across the world, we wreak havoc in the system. If I may just say, Putin is no different than the young man on the street corner. If you don't solve it, and you're in distress, and you think the way to solve that is violence, whether you have nuclear weapons and missiles, or whether you have a handgun or an AK-47, that's how you solve the problem, right? For those in the Christian spectrum, because I'm a Christian brother, I love Jesus. Cain killed Abel. So why should we do it? It's because the country doesn't heal until we focus on boys. Because girls don't cause aggressive problems. I'm not saying girls don't have problems. I'm not saying they're not mental health issues. I'm not saying there's things we can't solve with girls. It's an and, not an or.
Two things can be true.
Two
Absolutely.
things can be true. So we have to really keep back to your question is if you see the incarceration rates, you see our program participation, you see what our profile of staffing looks like. 33% of the college enrollment in HBCUs since 1979 is boys. HBCUs were started for boys. And I'm not saying they should box girls out. I'm saying in every social institution, we are indexing and girls are ascending, and we should keep having girls ascend, but we need to get boys moving. Because the violence, if boys have an aspirational goal, you stop causing problems.
Michael DeVaul, you dropping nuggets, man. I hope you guys took that history lesson into account, right? And take hold to this right here. Because if we don't grab hold to that right now, Mike taught me a thing, don't suffer in silence, right? And so many of our boys are doing that. And so in order for their release, they're lashing out in different aggressive ways. And it will get to that place. Either we want them to be the place to make taxes and not take taxes. So Michael DeVaul.
And vote.
Yeah.
And vote, right? There's two things in democracy that are really important.
Right.
Becoming an investor in the democracy, which is you're paying taxes, and the other is voting.
Yes, sir.
And the other thing I would say to folks is we got to get to a place where we re-equip the skills of the youth development person
Yes.
to hear
Yeah.
what boys are saying. So being black, if I can just say this for a minute, those of you excuse me, because my mama is here, because I still say this in my head.
Yeah.
You know, we have to remember boys, black boys particularly, let me just index on myself. Fuck you is the endearing way for you to ask for help.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you know him, and you're really listening to him, and you're really talking to him, and when he says fuck you, you say, hey, 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 what happened?
Right.
And you really unpack the fuck you, because fuck you is not a bad word in your head. You can't say it out loud. And I had to learn that, because I used to tell police officers fuck you. I used to tell teachers fuck you. I got suspended. I went to court. I had a record.
Yeah.
I didn't know I had a record till I was 50, and I had to get, I went to get my TSA pre-check, and they were like, hey. And they said, well, let me ask you a question.
You said F you.
Yeah, they said,
you ain't about to go out this country.
No, you finna stand in this line, sir.
I still hear it in my head, right? But I
Uh-huh.
learned to ask questions when I hear the word fuck you, because I moved from distress to eustress. But here's what I say to people. When I was 50, I wanted to get my TSA pre-check. And the guy asked me, first, have you ever been arrested? And I said, no. I had completely forgot about it. It was like, I was 15. And he said it again. And then I could hear the fuck you being resurrected in my head. Hey, man,
it was
hey,
down in your spirit.
What you talking about, right?
Yeah,
And he
yeah.
said, I need you to calm down and just think about it. So I thought about it, right? And I said, yeah. Well, he said, yeah, I can see that. And I said, what do you mean you can see it? Now, I'm going to just say this to you. I've been to the White House. I've been all through places being background checked. No one's ever asked me that question, right? And so what it taught me was, he said, you can get it expunged. It costs you $10,000, blah, 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 blah. You know, to get it expunged, get a lawyer. And I thought, well, it's just a part of who I am, right? But my point to people is, I was saved because Illinois had the legislation, right, to suppress the actual records so that you can't see them. It's not expunged, right, but it's suppressed so that you never had a job issue. But you imagine if I was in a state where that wasn't right.
Right.
Yeah.
I might not be here.
Right. Right.
I'm
Man.
here. Right?
You, and we so glad.
Yeah, I'm here.
We so glad.
Yeah.
Man, we tackling topics and telling the truth.
Hey, look, but before we sign off,
Woo.
my girl LaShae Leonard back in the back, y'all.
Hey,
Show a little
LaShae.
love for making it
Hey,
sound so
LaShae.
good. Michael DeVaul, thank you, man, for all of this right here.
All that you do.
Truly,
Absolutely.
knowledge just dropped, y'all.
All that you.
So,
Black gives back. It's a hashtag.
Yes,
Go
it
on
Check
is.
us out on the
hashtag
website.
that. Black gives back.
YMCA.org/BYMOC.
Yes.
All right, here we go.
Yes, yes, yes.
Hey, y'all, thank y'all for being here.
Thank
CAUSENETIC
y'all.
Podcast.
Woo!
Thank you,
Give it
thank
up
you.
for
At
Michael
2023
DeVaul.
General Assembly.
Yeah. And wherever you get podcasts, go and listen to all our other 177.3 episodes. I don't know how many it is.
But while you're out there, make sure you subscribe to us, right? But listen to us weekly.
And give us a 5-star rating. And as always,
Be dynamic
and be phenomenal.
and be
CAUSENETIC.
CAUSENETIC.
Thank you.
Thank you.